On March 23rd, 2019, one of the biggest achievements in Super Mario Odyssey was achieved. The any percent category, which involves beating the game as fast as possible, was completed in under an hour by the one and only Nicrovita.
Yes, dude. Yes. Yes. Fuck yes. Fuck yes, dude. Fuck this shit. Holy fucking shit. Let's fucking go. Woo!
The road to sub-hour was one of the most insane journeys in speedrunning history, and after the thousands of players, hours, dedication, discoveries, and more, the end result was this near-perfect run that was put together by Nicrovita. Now this time was achieved over 3 years ago. How would people go about beating what was once considered to be Odyssey's most legendary milestone? Well, I think it's about time to tell the story of how this game was shredded to pieces beyond the infamous mark that is known as sub-hour. This is the Super Mario Odyssey speedrun revolution. If I am going to explain how this revolution took place, it is very important that I explain a few key fundamentals. The first fundamental would of course be the movement techniques used throughout the speedrun, as well as the tricks, glitches, and routes that were used back then. The other fundamental I will explain is optimization within the game, specifically how optimized Nicro's world record was at the time. As soon as the game was released back in October 2017, we were given a plethora of movement options. Not only do you have a dive, backflip, triple jump, wall jump, side flip, ground pound, spin pound, and roll, but you also have Cappy, who plays a very important role not only in the game itself, but the speedrun as a whole. Cappy's main purpose is of course to capture things, which can be done by just throwing out Cappy, but sometimes it's faster to do an up throw, spin throw, or even a down throw. Cappy can be used as something for Mario to bounce off of, and you can even cancel a roll using Cappy. Needless to say, this variety in movement tech in a 3D Mario game was almost unheard of even when you consider games such as Super Mario 64 or Super Mario Sunshine. Now that we know the basic mechanics of Odyssey, how would players such as Nicrovita use them to their advantage to push the game to being beaten in under an hour? Well, for starters, rolling is the fastest method of traversing your way from moon to moon, so you will be seeing top runners roll as much as they can. Secondly, top runners will use the height that Mario is able to obtain to clear gaps in distance that the casual player normally wouldn't be able to clear, whether it be clearing this gap to skip the first moon in Cascade Kingdom, or doing this tight triple jump to make it up to the topper boss fight in Cap Kingdom. Finally, top runners will use any means necessary to save time, whether it be a glitch or a sequence break. Now, covering every glitch and sequence break can be an entirely different video on its own, but there are some very key ones that I am going to mention right now. The first is the roll cancel clip. Remember how I mentioned that you could cancel a roll by throwing Cappy out? Well, if you press jump and Cappy at the same time, you can do this roll cancel while maintaining speed. Using this technique, you are able to clip through some walls, typically walls that have a sloped curvature around them, like the Sphinx that Nicro does a roll cancel here to save time getting this moon. Another technique that is used is the moon clip. Upon approaching an uncollected moon, if you do a backflip followed up by a cap throw, you get a small boost in height. Nicro uses this to his advantage to clip out of bounds in Cascade Kingdom here to get to the Odyssey faster, and again in Wooded Kingdom to save even more time by clipping out of bounds here and getting this moon you would normally get with the tank alongside this moon up here. Finally, Nicro will use the various captures to his advantage, and sometimes this involves doing a bit of sequence breaking, such as in Luncheon Kingdom, where you can use the turnip and the panbro to push yourself into this moon with a barrier around it. I should also mention that this run was done on version 1.0 of the game, and at the time the most recent version was 1.2. Above all, every movement technique has a place in the any percent run, and the movement can get so optimized that even having a mastery of the movement isn't enough. Every dive and cap bounce is an opportunity for time save, and maybe you won't save much time from diving slightly faster in one section, but if you try to optimize every single one, those milliseconds will very quickly compound into crucial seconds that are saved throughout the run. Now that I've given you the Odyssey prerequisite, how good really was Nigro's run? Well, for starters, if you look at Nigro's timer, you'll of course see the splits, but at the bottom there is something that says sum of best segments. The number next to it is the time Nigro would get if he tied the best he's ever played in each segment of the run. Essentially, it's a run that is not perfect, but it's pretty damn close to perfect, as it would be a run that pulls off everything he can, not only without mistakes, but quickly as well. As you can see, Nigro's sum of best, or SOB, was a 59.12, meaning that he had 47 seconds of leeway to get sub-hour over the course of the entire run. 47 seconds may seem like a lot, but Nigro had multiple segments for each kingdom, as opposed to having each kingdom as a segment, meaning that the more segments you have, the harder it is to play closer to your SOB. When it comes to mistakes, Nigro really only had 2 very apparent mistakes, with the rest being either very minor or him just being slower in certain sections. Coincidentally, these 2 apparent time losses both took place in Wooded Kingdom, with the first being him falling down here, which lost about 5 seconds, and him taking damage here, which also lost around another 5 seconds. Outside of that, there were of course some smaller time losses, such as a sloppy pillars room at the end, but for the most part, it was looking like a 59 4x was the best that we were going to get. Now, there's a very important detail that I've been waiting to mention until now, and that is the fact that Nigro was not the only player at the top. In fact, the race for sub-hour had really been between all of these people, and it was only a matter of time before someone pulled it off. Once the pressure of getting sub-hour first wore off, the other top runners started to breach the barrier, and they breached it fast. After Nigro got sub-hour, a runner by the name of Goryuya would get a 59.59. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I said that people would breach the barrier fast. Goryuya's run was later retimed to be a high 59.59, while Nigro's was a low 59.59, so Nigro was still on top. However, when April 1st came around, a runner by the name of Chaos Pringle would get sub-hour, but this time it was a 59.58. 2 weeks later, Chaos would get a 59.57, followed up by another 59.57 the very next day. It was at this moment that Chaos decided to get another 59.57. And no, I am not joking, he actually got a 59.57 3 separate days in a row. Now, like I mentioned earlier, version 1.0 of the game was faster than the more current versions of the game because of the various tricks that you can do. However, when April 25th of 2019 came around, version 1.3 of Odyssey was released to support the Toy-Con VR goggles. Not much changed from 1.2, except for one thing. Every single load time in the game was improved, and throughout an any % speedrun, this saved time from loads was about a minute. Despite these loads saving a bunch of time, it was unsure if 1.3 was faster because you weren't able to do 3 crucial tricks anymore. No more first moon skip, no more sphinx clip, and no more turnip clip. Now, if there's one thing that is for sure about this game, and any speedrun in general, is that people will either find something completely new that will save time, or revisit an older idea and bring it to life. This is what happened with 1.3. With the addition of 1.3, Goryuya was able to cut off an astounding 11 seconds from the world record, and that's considering the fact that he had more noticeable time saves than the previous world records. However, 1.3 wasn't the only ingredient used to cook up this new world record. One crucial discovery was made that helped Goryuya get this world record. Despite it being rather complicated, it was surprisingly viable. This trick would be none other than DSTA, also known as Daylight Savings Time Abuse. Normally, if you plant a seed in Odyssey, it will take 20 minutes for it to grow. However, if you change the time on your Switch, then you are able to grow the seed instantly. The initial problem with this is that you would have to do all of this menuing during the run, making the trick not so worth it, but if you set your time at the beginning of the run to say 1:53 AM on Daylight Savings, by the time you are in Sand Kingdom ready to plant the seed, the clock will go from 1:59 AM to 3 AM, allowing for the seed to not only grow instantly, but prevent any menuing during the speedrun. Therefore, with the loss of Sphinx Clip and the new addition of DSTA, Sand was now faster on 1.3 by a slight amount even without Sphinx Clip. Goryuya's run was nothing short of impressive, but it was definitely not safe to say the least, because on May 7th of 2019, Chaos would clap back and it wouldn't be a 0.5 second world record this time.
Get in fucking line, dude! Woo! That is my best run I've ever completed out of any fucking run I've ever done. That was nuts. Fucking ridiculous run. Holy fuck. I don't know how the hell I'm gonna even beat this. What? I'm gonna have to add like a shitload of strats, dude. I can't. I'm actually in disfucking-belief that just happened. Is this a dream?
Chaos had not only gotten an 11-second world record, but this run was 11 seconds off of his sum of best. Now, of course, Chaos didn't have the best sum of best out of all the runners, considering his was a 59.24, while Goryuya had like a low 59 1x sob. However, what really shined about Chaos was his sheer consistency, as he was able to pull out runs with little to no mistakes, leaving runs that would either be beaten by an absurd combination of smaller and riskier time saves, or a bigger time save altogether. After the 59.35, Chaos decided to lay back a bit and do other categories, while other runners decided to grind to the top. Out of those top runners, one would finally rise to the top after being on pace for a world record multiple times. This would be none other than Tyrone, who on June 8th of 2019 would get his first world record of 59.32. Keyword first. Chaos Pringle would of course clap back in typical Chaos Pringle fashion by getting a time of 59.31 the very next day. Apparently this was my reaction when the world record happened. This world record would stand for about a month until Chaos would come back and get a 59.30 on July 8th of 2019. These runs were getting to the point where even 3 to 4 second mistakes would kill the run, so the Odyssey community had to resort to implementing as many small time saves as possible, despite how much risk they might have added to the run. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Chaos was a very consistent runner, and if I were to describe Tyrone, I would say that he is a pretty good mix of consistency but also speed. However, on the other end of the spectrum was a top runner who went for almost every single strat that he could think of, regardless of the risk. This would of course create inconsistency, but it also widens the amount of potential for huge time cuts. That is, if you're able to pull it off without going insane in the process. Mitch's first world record, and he cuts off 16 whole ass seconds without any new discoveries being found. What made this run even more insane was the fact that he had some pretty noticeable mistakes, such as this one in Night Metro, where he bonked and then went into the menu, as well as some other smaller mistakes scattered throughout. Regardless, Mitch was still able to play less than 30 seconds off of his sob. This record by Mitch would last for a very long time, a month and 9 days to be exact. However, people thought this would last way longer. Even Mitch himself said that this world record would be extremely difficult to beat, and as you'll see later on in the video, that's typically not what you hear when someone gets a world record. However, when the 1 month and 9 days passed, a new world record of 59.09 from Tyrone would emerge. This world record achieved by Tyrone was actually 58 pace all the way until luncheon, but unfortunately he lost 12 seconds there. Regardless, this run proved that 58 was definitely in reach. It would just be a brutal grind to get there. However, this world record would start something that was much bigger than the 58 grind. It would mark the sheer dominance and unintended rivalry between Tyrone and Mitch. Tyrone would beat this own world record again on September 30th with a time of 59.05, which was immediately beaten by Mitch with a lower 59.05. Tyrone would clap back with a 59.02. Every single day, Tyrone and Mitch would stream hours of attempts, 58 pace after 58 pace. And after all of these world records, close attempts, and chokes in late game, one of them would finally break the monumental barrier they had been working so hard to break. If Tyrone wasn't already a legendary part of any percent history, he was definitely a legend now after achieving the first 58. Mitch would go on to get a 58 a few weeks later, but while this was all happening, Tyrone would do the unthinkable. 2 world records in one day straight after he got his first 58. The first being a 58-55 and the second being this run. Once again, people were saying that any percent was dead because of this insane record. In the wise words of Tyrone, this run is actually fucking nuts. Almost perfect for current strats. Tyrone had no intention of playing any percent for a very long time after this run. In fact, the only 2 circumstances that would allow for him to come back would either be someone bopping him or a new discovery. Coincidentally enough, a new discovery was found shortly after Tyrone's world record, because how else are you going to revive something that is supposedly dead? For the longest time, runners would use this dino to get up to the boss fight in Cascade Kingdom, but by accident, a completely new way of getting up was discovered. A way that, if done optimally, could save upwards of 10 seconds. This trick was known as DSS, or Dino Skip Skip, and it involves you landing on this very precise part of the wall, followed up by doing some platforming to get to the boss arena. What made this trick difficult was landing on the wall, as you were basically just diving towards this area and praying you would make it. However, as time would pass, the consistency of the trick would go up, and Tyrone and Mitch would start to implement it into their runs. Everyone knew that the world record was once again not safe, but Tyrone's 58.47 would stand the test of time all the way until 2020. Mitch and Tyrone would eventually start to come back to any percent, and they both managed to get their sobs to 57 through adding not only DSS, but by adding a bunch of small optimizations. Finally, on February 15th of 2020, there would be not only just 1 world record, but 2 world records once again. Mitch would get a 58.44, followed up by a 58.42. The very next day, Mitch would get the very first 58.3x with a time of 58.39. He had beaten the world record 3 times in under 24 hours after Tyrone's world record had stood for 3 months. Like this, Tyrone and Mitch had reached a new skill level and knew that they could push the category to a low 58, maybe even a 57 if they kept trying. At this point, Tyrone and Mitch had been at the top of the leaderboards for almost an entire year, while the game maintained its position as one of the most ran speed games of all time. Tyrone and Mitch were going for low 58, while third place hadn't even got a 58 yet. As per usual, Tyrone would once again get the world record with a time of 58.36, and about a week and a half later, on March 8th of 2020, he would get a world record of 58.34. Mitch wouldn't just go down with a fight though, as on March 11th of 2020, he would get a 58.33. The grind for 57 was on, and both Tyrone and Mitch were implementing small strat after small strat. However, before we get into that battle, I would just like to mention that if you look at Mitch's splits closely, it says something about this guy named Anto Gaming. A lot of you know that I've actually met Anto before, and he does not smell stinky in the slightest. Is actually a very cool guy. Now throughout this story, I've been talking about how Mitch and Tyrone would stay a step ahead by implementing a bunch of small optimizations that add up throughout the run, but how exactly are they doing this? Well, a lot of it just lies in the movement of the game. Because the movement is so complex, it's very easy to save a small amount of time everywhere, which at surface level just looks like invisible time save, but there is a method to the madness. Of course, both of them have the highest level of dedication towards any percent, but there are also other strategies used to obtain this quote-unquote invisible time save, the most notable being the best theoretical timesheet, otherwise known as the BTT. You see, the BTT takes the any percent run and chunks it up into hundreds of segments, and then puts all of the best segments together to create what could possibly be the best theoretical time that humans could achieve. This means that there will be players from all over the Odyssey community who grind out these segments down to the frames. Since this is done entirely by humans, it's not perfect, but it's the closest thing that we have to perfect, considering the fact that tasks or tool-assisted speedruns are still in development for Nintendo Switch games such as Odyssey. This sheet was a vital and underlooked resource for improvement because there was always a new strat to pull from, even if it saved 0.1 seconds, and you could bet that Tyrone and Mitch would slowly over time add BTT strats because after all, the BTT would usually remain 2 to 3 minutes ahead of world record at all times. A month after Mitch got his world record of 58:33, Tyrone would get on an insane run. Halfway through this run, he was already 12 seconds ahead of his PB, which was a 58:34. However, when he got the snow, he would unfortunately lose 7 seconds, but the run was so good that world record was still realistically on the table. Tyrone would go on to get a very clean second half and ended with a 58:23, cutting off 10 seconds of the world record, and with how optimized the game was getting, this was huge. Then Mitch would beat it with a 58:23 days later. Tyrone and Mitch would continue grinding and adding small optimization after small optimization in the hopes that it would be just enough to barely squeeze out a 57. 2 weeks would pass and Mitch would cut off a large chunk of his own world record with a time of 58:13, and almost an entire month later, on May 24th of 2020, Tyrone would get a 58:11. The 58:11 would stand for a long time, months to be exact. Even getting on a 57 pace was hard enough, especially considering the fact that nerfs will usually through the run, if not sooner, because of how easy it is to reset in early game to harder kingdoms such as Sand and Wooded, or difficult tricks such as DSS. Considering this plateau of world records at 58:11, other runners would start to catch up a bit, with Lucid getting the third ever 58 on June 7th of 2020, and a small plethora of runners getting a high to low 59s. While this grind for 57 was happening, a potential reroute was in the works for Luncheon Kingdom. This reroute didn't seem to be anything too big, maybe a couple seconds at most when coupled with insane movement. Essentially the idea here was to skip the Spirit boss fight, as opposed to fighting him, which in turn would also skip the cheese moon you get with the Pan Bro here. Skipping these two story moons would make it so we lose out on some moons we would normally get, but in turn we could replace those with other moons even if they're more out of the way, because we would be skipping out on the cutscene time from the story moons. This reroute would be coined the name Spiritless, which was kind of ironic because there's a reroute that skips Spirit in Wooded Kingdom that is also called Spiritless, but I digress. Now the fastest way to pull off this reroute would involve an insanely difficult roll cancel clip to get into this sub area, but top runners and Odyssey community members alike would find a way to make it worth it to go foreign runs without the roll cancel clip. Mitch and Tyrone would immediately get the labbing out Luncheon Kingdom, doing a bunch of ILs or individual level speedruns of it to push it down as low as they could, while simultaneously trying to get consistent at the route, whether it be this hard invisible block jump, or more nuanced sections such as traversing through this lava bubble sub area quickly. After a few weeks of practicing Spiritless, this practice would start to pay off for Mitch and Tyrone, as they had both improved their luncheons by around 6 to 7 seconds, which is just what they needed to snatch to 57 they had both been longing for. The only question now was, who would get it first? Well, on July 27th of 2020, the 58:11 was finally beaten.
Oh my god! Oh my god, I did it! Ah!
Mitch would not only get the first ever 57, but get it with time to spare. He had beaten the world record by 17 seconds, outdoing what he had done the previous July, where he had made a 16-second record cut with his 59.14. Mitch had once again blown people's minds, and he didn't even know how to process this new world record. I mean, for crying out loud, this would be one of his only records where you'd have his mic on, and you could hear how nervous he was even just halfway through the run because of the amplified breathing. This record was of course improvable like all other records, but 57.4x was about the best that it was going to get. Mitch would put down Mario Odyssey after this run as he longed for the break that he deserved. However, Tyrone would continue to do any percent, and as the months went by, he would improve his PB and even get 57, but still fell behind Mitch's world record. He was capable of beating Mitch, he just had to get over the mental block of getting the record back. The rest of the year would go by, and going into 2021, Mitch would still hold the world record. Despite the mental block placed upon Tyrone, this mental block would not be enough to stop him from giving. When January 15th of 2021 came around, Tyrone's mental block was shattered.
Mash! Mash! Let's fucking go! Yes!
Tyrone had lost 7 seconds in 2 kingdoms, but the rest of the run was so good that he was still able to beat the record by 8 seconds. This record by Tyrone would cause Mitch to come out of his cave once again, and he would chip off 2 seconds with a time of 57.44. It would be another month and a half before the record would be beaten again, with a time of 57.43 by Tyrone. Despite Tyrone and Mitch still being on top, world record progression was finally starting to slow down again, as the optimizations people could add were getting scarcer and scarcer, considering the skills that the people were getting stronger and stronger. Tyrone would go on to get a 57.38 on April 28th of 2021, and 2 days later Mitch would clap back with a 57.35. You'll notice that throughout this video, there has been a common trend. Tyrone and Mitch compete to push the world record as low as they can, and when they are finally close to a minute barrier, a trick or a big time save is discovered that allows for them to finally cross the minute barrier. However, when it came to 56, a new time save like the ones that carried Mitch and Tyrone to 57 and 58 would still not be enough. Even with the inclusion of a bunch of new small optimizations throughout the run, and 56 was still out of the picture. It was going to take something different for 56 to happen. Now remember when I said that the BTT was usually 2 to 3 minutes ahead of the world record at all times? Well, that was still the case. However, this wasn't just because of small optimizations, this was partially the case because of a few select tricks that were deemed too ridiculous to go for in the any percent run, even for Tyrone and Mitch. Despite the absurdity of the tricks within the BTT, they were going to be mandatory if 56 was even going to be a possibility. So it became a matter of looking at each trick and deciding which one would be the least absurd. And surprisingly enough, the least absurd trick to add would be one that is at the very end of the run. You see, all the way back in April of 2020, before 57 had even happened, a runner by the name of Miwi theorized that you could skip the 2D section in Moon Kingdom after accidentally landing on an invisible slither of ground. Just for reference, this 2D section you go through with Bowser is something you do at the very end of the any percent run, and skipping it would save about 7 seconds, which would be a huge time save but also an incredibly nerve-wracking and difficult trick to go for considering it's at the very end of the run. So after weeks of the Odyssey community making progress towards skipping the 2D section via landing on higher pieces of invisible slithers of ground, Miwi would prove this 2D section skip to be possible. Fast forward back to April 30th of 2021, the 57.35 that Mitch got would be the same day that Mitch would put down the game. Lucid, who I mentioned earlier, was definitely catching up, as in May, he would get a 57.56. Despite this, the record remained all the way into August, and around the same time in August, the 2D section skip, also known as 2DSS, was starting to become consistent despite it still being insanely difficult. Of course, one of the first people to get semi-consistent at it was Tyrone, so he would start implementing it into his runs. The only time he wouldn't do 2DSS is if it wasn't needed to get world record, but spoiler alert, this wasn't the case. Not only was it time for Tyrone to push the world record farther than ever before, but it was time for something much more important: a montage. 6 months of on and off grinding, and Tyrone had brought any percent down all the way to a 57-13. This record, like all other records, had a few seconds scattered throughout the run, but even with being 14 seconds away from 56, it was still looking out of reach. However, when April of 2022 came around, we were once again blessed with a new trick. It was discovered that you're able to use this platform to clip out of bounds in sand, which allowed for a new reroute to happen that would save around 7 to 8 seconds, which was the perfect amount of time for 56 to be in reach. Beyond that, platform clip was really easy, as all you had to do was just let go at the right time and then throw Cappy against the wall to get out of bounds. The only variable that really needed to be figured out was the cycle of this platform, as it would save more time for the platform to be closer to the wall by the time you get there, as opposed to farther away. This variable was quickly solved though, as manipulating the camera would allow for you to control how far or close away the platform was, since it will move while on the camera or in view, but stays stagnant if not detected by the camera, aka pointing the camera down. On April 27th of 2022, Tyrone would get a new world record with platform clip, getting a time of 57:09. 10 more seconds and 56 was in his grasp. Years of any percent had culminated to this moment. Thousands of players actively speedrunning the game culminated to this moment, and through it all, Tyrone had remained on the top of the leaderboards for 3 years straight. 56 wasn't going to be easy, and if anything, it would probably take a lot of chokes and a few more world records before it evened out.
Get it! Oh my fucking god! There's the fucking...